I like the subway. I ride it. I believe in it as a democratic institution. When I ride, I imagine all the black and gray and white stretch limos that sit stuck in traffic on the street overhead, and the anxious phantoms behind the smoked glass windows, cursing and steaming, rolling their bulbous red eyes. They sit on black kid leather, a reading lamp over the right shoulder, air-conditioned, a television screen, a bottle of bourbon within reach. But they aren't going anywhere. And meanwhile, I roll along from stop to stop in the company of my fellow New Yorkers, a patient and humorous and classy people, to 42nd, 34th, 23rd, 14th, while the big Mazumbo's palace inches a few feet now and then, packed into a narrow side street at the bottom of a canyon, a herd of plutocrats trapped like swine.
If you enjoy people and human comedy, then here's a place to be where we have only to start out walking, and we will run into dozens and dozens and dozens of people that we'll remember will be strange and interesting to us. You come to realize that a life of calm and a life of order may not be what you want all of your life, and that maybe after your children are grown, my kids are grown up and moved away, maybe it's a good time to lead a kind of a jazzy life for a while.
In 1987, America's biggest down-home celebrity moved to New York, leaving the quiet life of the Midwest behind.
Oh, give me a horse, a great big horse, 'cause I'm a buckaroo. I want a wahoo, wahoo, wahoo. Oh, give me a ranch and a big pair of pants, and give me a Stetson too. I want a wahoo, wahoo, wahoo. Give me those wide open spaces.
In his national radio show and best-selling books, comic performer and writer Garrison Keillor had explored every aspect of Middle America culture.
They don't wahoo, that's the answer. I come from Lake Wobegon, Minnesota. I won't lie to you about that. It's a little town out in the middle of America, out in a flat place you've never seen. Maybe from the window of an airplane when you were being served the cheese crepes and the white wine. You looked out to your right, and there were miles and miles and miles of rectangles, green and brown. It was all flat down there. Then you went back and watched the movie. That's where I come from, down there. Well, look who's come through that door. I think we met somewhere before. Hello, love. Oh, yeah. Hello, love. Well, where in the world you been so long? I missed you so since you've been gone. Hello, love. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to a Prairie Home Companion. Coming to you live from the World Theater in downtown St. Paul. Presented every Saturday night at this time by Minnesota Public Radio and by this public radio station. Brought to you by your friends in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, the little town that time forgot. Everyone needs to have a custom, such as we have in Lake Wobegon, of the living flag, which we do every June the 14th for Flag Day.
Oh, I have no idea what that must be all fictitious, I think, as much as I know of, you know.
And if there aren't enough people to do it on June 14th, we try it again on the 4th of July. And if we still don't have it right, we try it again on Labor Day.
It's a place, I think, to which a great many Americans think they have some connection. but it exists mostly, of course, in Garrison's mind and in his work, in his writings.
We have 600 red, white, and blue caps. We need 600 people to stand in formation on Main Street on a hot summer day, very close to each other, wearing the appropriate cap, as the Living Flag Committee stands on the roof of the Central Building, our tallest building, 3 stories high, and looks down and arranges these people through a megaphone. It takes about an hour and a half, and that's with a lot of cooperation. If there are a lot of satirists in the crowd and a lot of individualists, it can take 2 hours. Once you get into formation, you don't quite dare leave. Sometimes you really have to. Holes appear sometimes as they get the red and the white stripes and the blue field with the stars all lined up. And then for what? You can't see what you've done. The only people who can appreciate it are the people up on the roof, and by that point, you're mad at them. You hate them. The editor of our newspaper, the Lake Wobegon Herald Star, is up there. Herald Star, he's got his camera up there, and he takes a picture and publishes it on the front page, but it's in black and white.
We all know the town perfectly well. You can find bits and pieces of it throughout the Midwest, but you can find the nature of the town in almost any part of this country. It exists everywhere.
And then the idea of getting around it by saying it was missed by the surveyors because of a fold in the map, or the paper they drew the map on. That's Garrison.
The town he created, Lake Wobegon, population 942, is something that, though imaginary, has become realer to a lot of Americans than the cities and towns that they live in. For one thing, because it's small enough to understand.
I checked it out, and I found that Garrison Keillor did visit Holdingford at one time because he was spotted here. But like he always did, he'd come in quietly and leave quietly. No one knew he was here, and he thought no one spotted him, but he was spotted right next to my barber shop. I got a telephone out there, and he was using that telephone. And from very good sources, he was recognized. And he visited a few other places in the village to check out what was happening.
It's a quiet town where much of the day you could stand in the middle of Main Street and not be in anyone's way. Not forever, but for as long as a person would want to stand in the middle of a street. It's a wide street. The early Yankee promoters thought they would need it wide to handle the crush of traffic. Merchants call it downtown. Other people say uptown, 2 words, as in, I'm going uptown to get me some socks. The buildings include the Inquist Block, Union Block, Security Block, Farmers Block, and Olson Block. In 1889, they hung a man from a tower for stealing. They were tired of him sneaking around, lifting hardware off buggies, so they tied a rope to his belt and hoisted him up where they could keep an eye on him.
My grandparents, they come over here from Germany. My dad, he lived maybe 4 miles west of here. See, actually, he moved down here from South Dakota during the drought years or depression years.
Bless us, O Lord, for these and thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy body through Christ our Lord. Amen.
My part, this is God's country. I really enjoyed this part right here. I guess I wouldn't be satisfied in no other place. We wound up with 14 children. See, and then the oldest boy now, he's farming, but Most of them, when they get old enough out of high school, they go into service for 2 years or something. See, and then they all settled around locally. They have to get married and stuff.
Why do you think Germans make good farmers?
Well, I really don't know. Just like the hard work, I suppose, and the independence, I guess.
My people didn't come to Lake Wobegon from Norway or from Germany. They came from England, as you can probably tell. They came from north of here, up in Cumberland, a little town called Skelton. They left about 1680 on my father's side of the family. They were religious people. They were Puritans, nonconformists, and they came to America for the chance to enjoy greater restrictions than what were permissible under English law. They were seeking a chance to repress and be repressed, and they found it over there.
Number 94. My posture, facial expression, if any, tone of voice, gait, all were of constant critical interest as you strove to achieve a perfect balance in me. Sit up, don't slouch. Then relax, you make me nervous just to look at you. Why such a gloomy look? Then wipe that smirk off your face. Pick up your feet. Then can't you walk without sounding like a herd of elephants?
Of course, we know that Keillor was brought up in this strange fringe Protestant sect, and he had a very rigorous, what the British would call chapel upbringing. I think that with that kind of background, you never really get over religion.
Grew up in a bunch called the Plymouth Brethren. They were fundamentalist people. We didn't smoke or dance or drink or go to shows or dance or any of that stuff. We'll be there. We'll be there. You can't come. But we'll be there. You'd love to come. I know you would. Well, maybe you can. No, I changed my mind. I always felt odd as a kid. I felt like there was a mark on me. Somebody had hung a tag, hung down on my forehead. It said, fundamentalist.
At one level, it's quite clear that he's populated Lake Wobegon, the mythical town, with Catholics and Lutherans, a sort of stereotypical Minnesota mix. And he's picked up some names of local people and used them sometimes playfully, and sometimes I think just for the sound of the syllables.
Belongers. And I feel understood among Lutherans. They're very friendly and humorous people. And I feel healthy with them. Number 1. You have fed me wretched food, Vegetables boiled to extinction, fistfuls of white sugar, slabs of fat, mucousy casseroles made with globs of cream of mushroom, until it's amazing my heart still beats. Food was not fuel but ballast. We ate and then we sank like rocks. Every Sunday, everyone got stoned on dinner except the women who cooked it and thereby lost their appetites. The rest of us did our duty and ate ourselves into a gaseous stupor and sat around in a trance and mumbled like a bunch of beefheads.
Refill on a lutefisk.
Meatballs. I need meatballs.
Lutefisk is something that was brought over from the old country. Lutefisk is not a species of fish. Lut means lie in Norwegian, and so it's a process of reconstituting it in lye water. And then the lye is soaked out of it again, so it's not harmful, so they say, to the digestive system.
It is a Norwegian delicacy made of cod or torsk, which is dried for years and sits around like kindling, like sticks, and then is soaked in lye, the chemical that you make soap with. And then, after it's soaked in lye, is rinsed again and again, but not quite often enough.
In this kitchen, the lutefisk is placed into a cooking kettle and cooked for a very short while in salt water and taken out of the water, and then it's ready to eat.
This is nice because it's white, it looks like fish, but if it's cooked improperly, and sometimes this happens in the microwave too, it gets to be clear and like jelly and not very appetizing, and that's when you need all the cream sauce you can get, all the pepper, all the melted butter.
The taste is something you do acquire. It's not a typical fish taste, and it's very difficult to describe. It's very unique.
Like my aunt says, you really do need to acquire a taste. So when I was young and we had this for Christmas Eve, I would eat maybe a teaspoon. And the older I get, the more I have. And today I probably had, a tablespoon or two.
People who make lutefisk have to change their clothes when they leave work and go home. But it doesn't help.
Lutefisk, lutefisk, lepsa, lepsa. We're from Minnesota. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Yeah.
Carl Krebsbach went down the plane down to Tucson, Arizona, to put his parents into winter storage here the other day, with winter coming on. Put Florian and Myrtle down there. They were anxious to go. And he was flying back on the plane, and a flight attendant propositioned him. They're right there in the tourist cabin. A man, a male flight attendant, made indecent overtures to him. There he was. 30,000 feet and not even close to an exit door. Well, he just couldn't believe it. The man leaned down and he said, "Do you like gay men?" Well, Carl blushed, turned 3 shades of red, came home. It was about the 5th weird thing that had happened to him on that trip. People in the outside world are crazy. He was telling Clarence Bunsen about this down at the Chatterbox Cafe over lunch. And Clarence said, "Was that during the meal service that he propositioned you?" Carl said, "Yes, I believe it was." Clarence said, "You don't suppose that he might have been asking if you cared for game hen?" Well, The entree in the tourist section were these little tiny chickens. Maybe it was game hen.
Keillor's career in broadcasting began at a university radio station in Minnesota.
If I recall correctly, it was sometime in the spring of '68 that he came on as a disc jockey for the early morning classical program. Whether any farmers in the neighborhood ever listened to Beethoven at 6 or 7 in the morning, I don't know. Garrison began as a very straight classical music announcer and with bits of news breaks, but then after a bit began to insert perfectly straight-faced public service messages and ostensible commercials.
Once again, Scotty's Cough Syrup for Dogs presents the adventures of Buster the Show Dog. Scotty's that acts fast to cure your dog's cough, croup, or sore throat. Scotty's, the only cough syrup your dog will ever need or want.
Dog sound seemed to be his favorite because he eventually wrote a script for it, a Buster script, and the barking was a large dog.
Suddenly, a long black car pulled up alongside them. They raced off to the airport terminal, and then Mr. Euchre drove the limousine up over the curb and through the doors and right into the terminal itself.
And occasionally he would have a script that he wanted to have a voice, a character read. And so he, for some reason, I don't know why he thought I could do it.
Come on.
Well, the counters are 4 miles that way. Come on, you dumb dog.
Well, buck up, lad. Don't be whining all the time. Lots of people are a lot worse off than you are.
My favorite vocal sound, only because everybody else can identify with it and like it, is the sound of a car stuck in snow or mud, spinning his or her tires trying to get out. And so it would sound like this.
Buster the Show Dog, brought to you by Scotty's Cough Syrup for Dogs. Fast-acting Scotty's cures your dog of cough. Join us again next week for more adventures of Buster the Show Dog.
Broadcasting tended to provide income for him in the early days, before his books had become bestsellers. But everything that he does is done from the writer's perspective. The radio shows are really an outlet for what he writes.
Though it gets hard, it does, to sit and look at a blank piece of paper, hour after hour, page after page, sentence after discarded sentence. It does drive you crazy.
As I recall, a couple of awfully good pieces of his appeared in the New Yorker during that time that he was working here.
Keillor rented a house on a farm near the university.
He come up here in late 60s, I believe it was. He was here about 2 years. It was in the fall when he come. And he worked as at the radio station in St. John's. Was a broadcaster, I guess, wasn't he, as much as I know.
And I always wrote in the morning, then as now. And usually at some point in the morning, late morning, Norbert and his boys would drive into the yard in their truck and come to feed their cattle.
Well, one time we were out of electricity, and it was during the winter. The roads were bad, and I couldn't get here. And for some coincidence, the telephone didn't even work. So I didn't get here till, well, I was supposed to come in the evening to feed the cattle. And I didn't get here till the next morning. And when I got here next morning, he had fed the cattle for me. And I was surprised about that, you know, being he was a city boy. I figured he didn't know nothing about cattle, but he apparently knew that he had to have some feed, and he gave him some feed.
Asleep upstairs with the windows open for the first time in months, I was awake at 5 or 6 in the morning. The air was cool and wet. I put on blue striped trousers, a green wool sweater, and blue sneakers. Our dog chuckled in the kitchen, hearing, as I did, the birds, 1,000 of them, and I opened the screen door and let us out. What I saw was the old red barn with cows in it, the granary full of oats, the empty chicken coop, the machine sheds with rusty parts lying around on the ground outside, the corn cribs full of corn, and the pump house, pig barn, and silo, the brown brick house, hundreds of trees, the cow pasture, creek, low swamp, and dump, and beyond the trees, fields plowed last fall that smelled of pig and cow manure, and front and back roads, neighbors' fields and woods, and clear sky. I walked across the yard and sat on a big rock by the road. I heard the dog bark, 4 clear barks. Found paradise. Found paradise. I said I would, and by God I have. Here it is, and it's just what I knew was here all along. Well, I guess that is about it. I'm happy to be here, is all.
He called it paradise, it's what...
Why do you think he called it paradise?
I don't know. See, I don't know what kind of, where he come from or how he was brought up or that I don't know. See, one thing I did notice, when he come to look at the house before he rented it, he checked underneath the sink here to see if there was complete plumbing there. Not that it went into a pail or something like that, he did check that. That's one thing that it struck me when he come in the house. He looked around, looked in the cupboards, but he checked underneath the sink.
The time is 5 o'clock. We take you now to the World Theater in downtown St. Paul for A Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor.
From Minnesota Public Radio.
Well, look who's coming through that door. I think we met somewhere before. Hello, dog.
We were having great success with the Prairie Home Companion here in the Twin Cities. More and more people were coming. The theater was beginning to be sold out well in advance of the show. And we decided that we would try a national broadcast special.
Coming to you live from the World Theater in downtown St. Paul and presented every Saturday night at this time by Minnesota Public Radio and by our public radio station. With Mr. Chet Atkins and his walking-talking guitar, Mr. Johnny Gimble and his fiddle, Peter Cusco, Miss Jean Redpath with us, Mr. Butch Thompson at the piano.
So we did a show in an auditorium that held 5,000 people, and to our astonishment, 5,000 people came.
I've heard it said time and again, you always go back where you've been. I never really believed it was true. Here we are, you are too.
The reputation grew, and by June of 1987, it was not only the most popular program on public radio, but it was carried by more stations, I think, than any other program on public radio.
I listened to it after I found out what he was doing, and then I found out when it was on the radio. I did turn it on already and listen to it. And I also read in the paper where he was got to be famous because of his program. A lot of people liked it,
My Aunt Lois was young and she was like me. She loved to pretend. And pretend we were somebody else. Pretend we were somebody. Pretend this was our bus. It was a private bus and we go any place we wanted to.
favorite game to play was pretending that we didn't know each other. Pretend that we were strangers. I'd get up out of my seat as the bus headed towards Minneapolis. Get out of my seat and walk back up the aisle and turn around and come back to my seat and say, "Is this seat taken? May I sit here?" And she'd say, "Sure, go ahead." I sat down. I'd say, "It sure is a pleasant day today, isn't it?" Which we didn't do in our family. We didn't talk to strangers. But you see, we were strangers, so we could be whoever we wanted to and do as we wished, so we talked to each other. "Yes," she said, "it's a pleasant day." She said, "Are you going to Minneapolis then?" I said, "Well, I'm going to Minneapolis, but then I'm going on to New York City, where I am starring in a Broadway play. And then in a couple of months, I expect to go back to my home in Paris, France, where I have an apartment on the Champs-Élysées. I've come out to Minnesota only for the funeral of my aunt, an aunt who has died. She was fairly young. Well, that's a terrible thing. That's a terrible thing, she said. You must feel very bad. You must miss this aunt terribly. You must have been very close to her. I said, "No, I wasn't particularly. But she was sort of family," I said. "You see, I was adopted. I was an adopted child. My real parents were Broadway actors, and they sent me out here to live on the farm because they thought I would get more to eat. But people out here don't really understand people like me, and I can't say I really miss her all that much," which made her feel terrible. And she turned her face toward the window, and she looked out the window as the bus rolled along until minutes passed and I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned to her and I said, "Talk to me." And she said, "I don't need to talk to you." I said, "Talk to me." She said, "If you bother me, I'll talk to the driver and have him throw you off the bus." She said, "I don't know you." I said, "You know me. Say that you know me." She said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never laid eyes on you before. I don't know you from a bale of hay." I said, "You know me. Say that you know me." Until finally I couldn't stand it any longer. And I began to cry, and then she put her hand on my shoulder, and then I could be who I was again.
It was listened to by students. You could watch them come in the audience, by retired people, by major media figures and show business stars, by Supreme Court justices, by corporate CEOs, by poor people, by wealthy people, a total mix of people listening to that show.
In 1985, Keillor hit the bestseller lists and the cover of Time magazine. His reputation as an American writer was well established. From now on, the radio show would sell the books, and the books would sell the show.
I think there without a question is a much higher proportion of readers in the public radio audience than in the population in general. Just the success of Garrison's book, the number of people who enjoyed listening to him and then went out and bought his books, making them bestsellers throughout the country.
Wendy's is the beer a man drinks because it's the best. It's made from the deep well water from the town of St. Wendell's. There's no water like it.
People from all over the world have said so. It's good water. St. Wendell's has a municipal faucet, and people drive up with a trunk full of plastic bottles and get a month's supply.
A Frenchman came and got 2 gallons and took it home.
This is true.
This is true. French customs wasn't going to let him through, but they tasted it and said, "Ah."
Ah.
Ah.
Does that make sense?
Is Wendy's beer a real thing?
No, it must be just a figment of Garrison's mind.
Ah.
He writes a really good book. I really like the way he writes.
I recommend having a best-selling book once in a while. Probably a couple times in your life. I think it'd be good for anybody.
Yeah. We've got wonderful people in this town, and we didn't really know it was that important until we read Garrison Keillor's book, and he's got St. Wendell's beer in there, and the people in the book come in and ask for a Wendy's beer, and now that St. Wendell is in the book, maybe it'll be more famous yet.
24-inch blade on them or something like that, you know.
My husband, all his life, wanted to own a small garage, but the bar part was attached to it, and we had no choice but to take that along with it. And it really turned out just fine.
Good. Better? No. I got 20.
You owe me one more hand, Lucky.
Gonna lose.
I come to beat you. Oh my God. Put me in this time.
All right. I'm good. 18.
15. I'm all black.
What do you like to do in the winter?
Enjoy the warmth from the fire. I keep it pretty warm in here. Read.
I'll read any book that has a certain amount of excitement to it. I prefer Westerns. Other than that, I don't know what to say about them or what. This is Louis L'Amour's Kelly's Luck. I read it 3 times, and 2nd of 76, 5th of 82, and 10th of 85, because my initials are on the first page. This is Luke Short's book. And I read it, it's Play a Lone Hand. I read it the 6th to 80 and the 6th of 85, because my initials are also in it.
John, have you read all the books here on these shelves? Do you
Yes, I did. At some time or another, I read every one of them. Some of them I read as many as 4 and 5 times, depending on how old they are. I love to read.
Yes, people are great readers in the Midwest. I think they are. And I grew up among teachers, women mainly, who were passionate about books and who passed that on to us.
I was trying to write the great Midwestern existential novel. Smoking was part of it. They'd light a cigarette and look out the window. It was a gray day, and there were sort of nameless trees and shrubs out there. And they'd look towards the far horizon, and they'd say something existential like, I don't know. I just don't know. And they'd inhale. Then more people would come in. I never knew how to get them out of the room. I just knew how to have them come into the room. She turned and looked towards the door. Jim came in. Hi, Jim, she said. He walked to the window. He lit a cigarette. I don't know. I just don't know. He said. Room started to fill up with people. They didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have jobs or anything. Nobody was expecting them anyplace. They just were existential characters. I don't know. Maybe what we thought was existentialism was just poor circulation. Maybe they just smoked too many cigarettes.
It seems so different. The pleasure of writing seems so different from the pleasure of performing. When you perform, you've prepared yourself for this moment and this little period of time, which seems extremely short when you go out there. I've been out on stage for, I think, 2 hours without a break, all by myself, and it seemed like 10 minutes. You prepare yourself for this moment, and then you sort of fly through it. And in writing, you sit and hammer at something, and you take a little bit off this end, and you put a little bit on that, and you sit and are fascinated with it over a period of time, and you're reluctant to give it up.
In 1987, Keillor went on to conquer still another medium, this time television. In February of that year, his radio series, A Prairie Home Companion, began airing live on the Disney Channel.
I'm standing by. Oh, I can stand by with the best of them. Now, if you take off your glasses, it means that other people cannot see you. It's an old psychological trick they use in the television business. I believe in it. Nonetheless, I do want to make sure they're clean, because my parents will be watching.
Well, I think that Keillor fits in the kind of mainstream of American humor, which is long and reasonably well known. I think there are obviously connections between Keillor and Twain.
Oh, I can write fancy, and I can write plain. I've written with Thurber and with old Mark Twain. They mostly wrote better than I, and I mean it. But I am still living, and that is convenient.
The other American that Keillor reminds me of so much is Will Rogers, who was a cowboy humorist in the 1920s and 30s. He developed a patter. By the end, he had a nationally syndicated column. He was in films. He appeared all over the country, and he would talk about what he thought of current events in a very kind of down-home, folksy, straight-from-the-shoulder manner. All the time, he was twirling his lariat and doing rope tricks as he spoke.
Yodelay-hee, yodelay-hee, yo-hoo. It ain't easy being an American, folks. Having to uphold justice and honor and truth in the world, and still have to round up them dogies and strays.
Keillor's great love for the Midwest has not prevented him from venturing east to explore a more urban environment.
A distant screeching. It gets louder and louder until the train light appears in the dark, so loud that instinct tells you to plug your ears. Your eardrums hurt. Mozart will never be so beautiful again. Your wife's voice will sound flat after this. You're destroying your fabulous ears and getting a pair of $19 ones instead. But putting fingers in your ears might mark you as a greenhorn. So you stand placid and afraid as the antique piles of spray-painted cars slide slowly past and stop. A door opens halfway. Your fellows squeeze past. We all shove in. The voice in the speaker overhead says, "Watch for the closing doors." And the doors shut on us, packed in tight, lurching into each other as the train jerks forward.
In telling stories, we look for the things that fascinate us, and nothing fascinates us more than images of doom and images of suffering. It's what we're afraid will happen to us. So we look at that, but in the meantime, millions of people in this city are leading quiet and productive lives in which they enjoy certain pleasures, and in which life has real civility and loveliness to it. And one would also like to tell that story. Would like to tell that story. I would especially like to tell that story to my children, I think.
29. You taught me not to go overboard, lose my head, or make a big deal out of it, but to keep a happy medium, that the truth is in the middle. No extremes, don't exaggerate, hold your horses, keep a lid on it, save it for later, be careful, weigh the alternatives, wear navy blue. Years later, I am constantly adjusting my feelings downward to achieve that fine balance of caution and melancholy.
We always ate at exactly the same time that everybody else did. We always had hamburgers on Friday night and beans and wieners on Saturday night and pot roast on Sunday and tuna fish hot dish on Monday. And I remember one Monday about 5:46 p.m. looking down at my plate and thinking to myself that everybody else in town was eating this same thing, made from the same egg noodles and the same tuna and the same Velveeta cheese and the same crumpled potato chips on top. Everybody was eating the same thing and had already had exactly 2 bites of it and was putting the third into their mouth. Which, if I knew that today, I would find comforting. But back then, it scared me. And I pushed the plate away and I said, I don't think I care for tuna fish anymore. What would you like? My mother said. I said, I think I'm gonna get up and make myself a sandwich of peanut butter, black olives, and pickles. And I did. It was the first step on the road to New York City.
Back in Minnesota, Keillor can still pull the crowds and hit the home runs.
This is a picture of myself and 8 of my brothers. We formed a baseball team, and most of the ball players on this team belong to the Great Sioux League. And we played a lot of games around this area, and we actually won. And I can remember reading a story that Garrison Keillor wrote about the 9 Schroeder boys that played baseball.
For a golden age of Lake Wobegon sports, you'd have to go back to the 40s. The town ball club was the Lake Wobegon Schroeders, so named because the starting 9 were brothers, sons of E.J. Schroeder. 9 big strapping boys with identical mops of black hair, big beaks, little chins, so shy they couldn't look you in the eye.
I felt was about my brothers and myself because he covered it almost to the T about shapes and sizes of the ball players, how the thing happened, how their manager happened to be E.J. Schroeder, and we actually had a man who managed baseball, and his name was A.J. Schroeder. And like he writes most of his stories, he didn't come right out and say this was the Ebnett family, but I do believe it was.
E.J. was ticked off if a boy hit a bad pitch. He'd spit and curse and rail at him, and then R.J. would go up and pound one out of the park, making the score 11-0. He'd circle the bases, and the old man would say, boy, he put the old apple right down the middle there, didn't he? Blind man could have hit that one. Your grandma could have put the wood on that one. When the Schroeders were winning every game, E.J. bitched about how they won.
This is the way he writes. He writes about something that makes you feel that you are the person he is talking about. You are the town he's talking about. He's always able to cover up the real identity of the town. But everyone in Minnesota thinks, hey, he's writing about something that we've done, or something that happened in my town.
Many of the things that you can say about Lake Wobegon, you can say about baseball. It's partly real, it's partly mythical, it celebrates small town values, it celebrates fathers and sons, the passage of the seasons, the teamwork, independence, you can go on and on and on.
Our baseball team, the Lake Wobegon Whippets, play their last game on Saturday. On Monday, Labor Day. Lost, I guess. I don't know. I don't need to find out. I assume they did. Their record going into the game, their record this season was 3 wins and 19 losses. No, it was 21 losses. They played 2 exhibition games in August. Nobody knows why. If you're a whippet, what's to exhibit? But they played 2 exhibition games. The reasoning, as I hear it, was that there had been rumors in town that their bad record was due to drug abuse, and so they wanted to do 2 exhibitions to raise money for the orphans and try and clear their names. This is a sad situation in America. People aren't allowed to just be no good anymore. We have to have a certified cause, like drugs or childhood trauma or learning disorder or something. People have lost their freedom to just be lousy, to be dumb, to be lazy, to be not that good. This team is not that good. They were not that good before there were drugs.
At the broadest level, I think he's touching on something about how America sees itself or wishes that it saw itself. Small town values, family, religion, and so on. And he, at the same time as he gently pokes fun at these things, he's also upholding them. He's also celebrating them.
Elmer, how you doing?
Don't tell me you need a haircut.
Yes, I do.
You've needed a haircut for a long time.
Well, it's kind of tough to get in here, you know?
I know. How would you like this done? I mean, it's been a while.
You're the master.
You've been pretty busy,
You
right?
gotta make me look good.
All right, I'll try. But I don't work miracles.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, Tom, I'm still only charging $4 for haircuts.
$4? When did you go up?
What do you mean go up? I'm getting paid for looking for hair.
Oh, no wonder.
I have heard stories about your grandma.
Well, as it turns out, my grandmother gave birth to 4 children in 1 year. My uncle was born in January of, I think it was 1915. And that following December, on the 25th, my grandmother gave birth to triplets. And they were born, I think it was 2.5 months premature. They only weighed like a little better than a pound and a quarter apiece.
This is a true story.
I swear it's a true story. And in order to keep them alive, like you say, there was no such thing as an incubator at that time, or a hospital.
No doctor? Midwife?
No doctor. It was a midwife delivered them. And in order for them to survive, they had to put them in bread pans in the oven.
Oh, come on, Tom. In bread pans?
Yes, to keep them
on.
warm, yeah.
Oh,
and then the next day, they loaded them up on a buggy, horse and buggy, and ran them into town to get them baptized because they were afraid they weren't going to make it.
Tom, I think I have something to tell you here about your hair. It's waving.
I've noticed that.
Yes? It's kind of waving goodbye.
Pardon me if I'm sentimental when we say goodbye. Don't be angry with me should I cry. As you leave, yet I'll dream a little dream of days gone by. Now and then there's a fool such as I. Thank you so much for being here, folks. Thanks for coming, and thanks for letting us come into your homes. We'll see you next week, I hope. Good night now. Good night.
That's the news from Lake Wobegon.
All the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above all.
We were kind of honored, you might say, that we were living in a house that he was in his house too at one time. And now he's such a famous man, and everybody recognizes him, and I'm just an old farm boy doing farm work, you know.